For the first presentation, um, I would like to invite here Mr. Matt Clayton, who is the CTO and co-founder of Mixcloud, which is a music streaming service with over 10 million active users and one of the fastest growing European startups. He will tell us a lot about how they manage to optimize data flows to create a beautiful product for the users. Matt, please.
So yeah, my name's Matt Clayton. Ooh, that's loud. And I run a company called Mixcloud. I'm sure some of you have heard of us and some of you haven't. So I'll give you a quick overview of what we do and what my role is there. Forward. It's not working. Can you guys go to the next slide? Show it now. Nope. Try again. Anyway, whilst we're doing this, Mixcloud is an online audio service. We specialize in hosting podcasts, DJ mixers, talk shows, long-form content about an hour long. We launched in 2009, and since then we've gone from 0 to 10 million active users, more than that now. My role there is I lead product and engineering, and I also lead analytics, and one of the founders as well. So we're available on pretty much every platform, mobile web, iOS, Android, desktop, tablet now as well on iPad and Android tablet as of yesterday, and we'll be launching on Sonos and a bunch of other platforms hopefully within a couple of weeks. So this is always the plan. Take your user numbers and go exponential up and to the right. This is never what happens, but this is always the plan. And I'm going to talk to you how we kind of execute against this plan and how we try and make this happen, and where we focus, how we make decisions, and how we look at data to kind of drive towards this. So what you find when you look at this graph is the teams who have done this is it's broken down into two parts, new users and retained users. And new users is always a fraction of a percent of that retained base going up and to the right. And yet what most teams try and do is they sit there and try and acquire more users, whether these be through growth hacking, where they try and do quick wins to get a bunch of users in the door, or whether they be through SEO techniques or buying users through advertising. But the really, really successful companies actually don't focus on those new users. They focus on those retained users and compounding it. And that's actually where the bulk of your problem is. And it's the hardest thing to work out. So today I'll be focusing mainly on those retained users, but I'll start by showing you what happens if you don't. We've seen this graph time and time again, competitor after competitor after competitor. We look at what they do, we analyze them remotely, and we see this plot every time. They go up, exponential growth, because they're focusing on new users. They get fantastic at bringing them in. Their supply runs out, they do something wrong, goes flat, it decays, they die, they move on. Here is actually one of our competitors from 2011, and this gives you an idea of the amount of data we can pull on them. This is Turntable FM, they're now shut. In 2011, they went from 0 to 400,000 monthly active users in under 4 weeks. They plateaued, they died. They were down to about 10,000 monthly active users by the end of last year. What you need to look at to get this data is look at the dailies. The dailies are always your leading indicator of monthlies. And if I go back a slide, what you can see is that the dailies flatten out about 2 weeks in. Ooh, back too far. Sorry. But the monthlies flatten out about 4 weeks later. So your dailies are very often a leading indicator of monthlies. And the ratio of the two gives you a good idea of retention, particularly with things like Facebook apps or Android apps, iOS apps. The ratio is a good number to keep an eye on. And it will give you a good leading indicator of whether the product is about to go south and whether you need to take drastic action. So moving on to this. So what you'll find, though, is they plateau to a certain level. And that level down there is actually the number of users they manage to make highly engaged, or convert to be highly engaged. And this number does grow up, and you manage to retain those through the tough times. But the casual users, the guys who just came to check out the product, they're the first ones to leave. They're the first ones out the door, and they're often the bulk in those early days. So you see this rapid growth, and then a decay as those guys leave the product. But what you're left with is those highly retained users at the bottom. So what you need to think about is how do you convert those casual users who come very easily into retained users who will stick around for the long term, because at the end of the day, that's what's fueling your long-term growth and making the product something which will last a decade and not become a flash in the pan. So how do we do this? We start by KPIs. Specifically, we start by a single KPI. We take our entire company and we distill it down to one metric. For us, that is listener minutes per 28 days. How many minutes of our content was listened over the last 4 weeks? 28 days is important because it's a multiple of 7, so weekly effects are taken out. If you do 30 days, which is pretty common, specifically with people using Google Analytics, you end up with these weekly dips where you're no longer having multiples of 7 days go through your data, and it makes it very hard and noisy. So focus on 28 days. Other people like Airbnb, nights stayed, Eventbrite, tickets booked, SendGrid we were talking to a minute ago and they're doing the next presentation, it's mail sent. One thing you'll notice about all of these is that they're core to what makes the product successful. They're not about uniques. We talked about it a minute ago, but actually, to drive uniques, you need to focus on core product value. And you need to take your entire product and distill it into a single number. Once you have that single number, pretty much every single argument about the team can be focused back onto that number and say, do we move this up or down? Does this product feature move it up? Does it move it down? Yes, no. Does it go out? It kind of resolves all of these decisions within our product. So for us, listener minutes is our primary number, secondary number is revenue. And that for us is kind of key. We're bootstrapped. We never took funding, so paying the bills is a huge part of what we do. And if we don't pay it, we would shut down. But our primary goal is how do we drive listener minutes? And everything is resolved around that. Some people call it a North Star. So dashboards. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because too many people go through these. We believe in dashboards. We believe in opening information up. Everyone should see all the data. It doesn't matter who they are. So for us, customer support has the same access to the same data our engineers do who are making the product decisions. And this is a basic dashboard for commenting. People can observe these. We actually set them as our homepage on our browser. When we open up the browser, it comes up with a key company dashboard. This was last weekend. We had a huge spam attack. Some guys in China decided to try and break into our system. They managed it. They were spamming the hell out of us. We actually didn't have alerts on this, so we didn't notice it. But come Monday morning, we were aware of it. It's just that sort of openness of data helps seed the key parts of the product, or the key knowledge about the parts of the product to everyone. So by opening up dashboards, making them available to everyone, people observe the data. They actually become secondhand knowledge to them, and they start thinking about the product in new ways. They start realizing that actually we don't have as many comments as we thought we did on the platform. More people are sharing it to Facebook, so they start thinking about how the product features and the data interact. But without allowing them to see the data regularly, they won't understand it. It takes a while to be able to get to grasps with this stuff and figure out how it works, and B, they won't be thinking about it, and therefore they won't be moving your core metric. Forwards. User accounting. This is kind of the core concept we operate on. It's something I see in most startups around the sort of the region of 5 million plus users, but it's not something they do at the early days, and I'd highly recommend you do this tomorrow. This is kind of one of the key building blocks we use. Think about your users, and they have a state, they have an idea, they have a concept of how they behave. You have active users, you have inactive users. Active users shown in the top left by the A, inactive in the bottom right. And you have dead users. These are users who have closed accounts. They will never come back again. Active users are people who use your service once in the last 28 days. Inactive users are people who did use your service, are registered, but have not used it recently in the last 28 days. So by using this construct, and we don't just use this for active users, we use it for every single feature on the site. So, for example, uploads. People upload content to the site. We will use this to model upload behavior as well as overall behavior. We'll use it to model behavior on commenting. We'll use it to model behavior on favoriting, on reposting. These are key actions to us, but your own apps will have different actions. So born. Born is this idea that a user has discovered something for the first time, so they've signed up. Die is somebody, as I said previously, who's cancelled it or closed the account. Sleep is somebody who was using it and no longer is. And awaken is somebody who wasn't using it and now is again. But by thinking about these 4 transitions of user states, certain ones we want to raise, certain ones we want to lower, we can now start thinking about how users transition from not seeing the site before to active, to inactive, and then back to active again. And by modeling that, we can actually predict pretty accurately how our user growth is going to occur, and we can actually figure out where the problems are and how to fix them. So we measure these 4 things: born, die, sleep, and awaken. I'll give you a quick example now of 2 sites and show you a comparison. So both of these sites have 1,000 users this month. Next month, they have 1,500 users. So when you zoom out, they look like they're going to behave the same. But however, under the hood, they have very different properties, and the way you would fix these products is very different. So the first site, site number A, has 1,000 users. 800 new users are added to that site every month. So they've added 800 new users, so they're now 1,800. 100 users have actually canceled their account. 300 users who used it last month have chosen not to use it this month, and they've brought 100 users back, probably through emails and things like that. So in this scenario, when you look at this, they're bringing in lots of new users, and they're not sticking around. They're actually sleeping, they're dying, they've got a huge amount of churn there. In this case, you really want to focus on retention. It's pretty obvious when you look at this, and you've seen a few of these, where to focus, particularly if you've done it month after month. Site B, however, same number of users at the start, same at the end. They only bring in 100 new users. 10% is actually pretty high, but go with it. No users have died, very few have slept, so their retention is fantastic. This is very, very high. They're bringing loads of people back from an old state where they've slept and now they've woken up again. What they need to focus on is new user acquisition, so things like SEO, email marketing, AdSense, AdWords, Facebook Connect, sharing, things like that. But the two sites exhibit the same growth curve. It's spot on. Site A, I'll tell you now, will probably burn out and be a flash in the pan. Site B will probably be around for a while, and if they figure out how to acquire new users, they'll be golden. So what you want to do is take your app and break it down into these 4 states: born, die, sleep, and awaken. And if you plot those out, it becomes very apparent how to predict where you will be next month, and also what kind of strategies and techniques you should be looking at to fix the problems which were underlying or restricting your growth. So let's talk about retention curves. This is one of the other core systems we use for modeling users. So we take every single user on the site, and we actually calculate this for every user every single day, for pretty much every property as well. So we have this concept of an R value, and an R value is either an R7 value or an R28. In the case of an R7, it is a number 0 to 7. An R28 is a number 0 to 28. And these numbers are simply how often did that user use the site in the last 7 days or 28 days, or how often did they use a specific feature in the last 7 days or 28 days. It's very basic. So in this case, this is actually an R7 value for the number of times they visited the site in the first week. So, you plot against the y-axis the percentage likelihood that they will be around in the next quarter. Or you plot basically the density or the percentage distribution overall. So this is the percentage distribution. And what you find is you end up with a lot of users in the lower numbers. This is to be expected because users churn. And there are fewer users in the higher numbers. But what this allows you to do is sort of see the rough use cases of your users. So in this case, we've got a bunch of users who are using the site once and 0 times. The 0 times is because they're signing up through other platforms, so things like mobile, and they don't actually touch the main website in this case. But then a couple of users come back twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5, 6, 7. Or it drops off and decays. But what this allows our team to do is see this very quickly and say, this week, this month, this quarter, we're going to be entirely focused on getting people from 1 to 2, from R1 to R2. And then we can see month after month how the shape of this changes. And based on those changes, we can see is how our retention overall is growing or developing. What I can tell you now is moving people from 1 to 2 is very, very hard. Any feature you do to bring somebody back the second time is just inherently, it doesn't work for many users. And the other really hard place is actually 5 to 6 is a nightmare as well. Anything you try to move people from bucket 5 to 6 means that you're trying to move them typically from a weekday behavior and move it into their weekend. So you can kind of see people who, particularly in our case, it's a music service. They listen 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. Getting them to listen on Saturday and Sunday requires a physical change in their behavior, and that's very hard to do. You see similar things with when you do R28, which are 28 values wide. The weekends and weekdays, and moving people across that gap is very, very hard. It can be done, but I would focus on 1 to 2 and 0 to 1 if you have an error like we do here. And that's often moving people from one platform to another, so from desktop to mobile or from mobile to desktop in this case. So the other thing we'll often do is we'll plot these graphs for 2 different types of users. So in this case, we have retained and not retained. So retained are people who actually were still around in two months' time, and not retained are people who disappeared. And we can see differences in their behavior very early on. And based on this, we can actually predict whether users are likely to be around, and we can say whether key features will make a difference. So I'll get into that in more detail later on. There we go. So identifying key product features. So how do we actually figure out what's working for our users, what's good, what's bad? This all starts typically on our whiteboard with a lot of brainstorming. We come up with thousands of these ideas, and actually, this is a short list in this case. Usually we come up with 1,000,001 things saying this is the feature, this is what that user does, which we predict will make them stay around on the site. And a lot of these are predictions. So some of them are like, we've got over here, time of day, the time of the day somebody joined the site. If they joined at 9 a.m. in the morning, are they more likely to retain than if they joined in 10 p.m. at night? Some of these you can alter, some of them you can't. So time of day somebody signs up, we can't do anything about that. But it might have a relationship to whether a user stuck around. So something like iOS push notifications in the middle. Sorry, this is very scrappy. If we find that iOS push notifications are likely to retain users, we can do something about that. We can build features to impact that. So what we'll do is we'll brainstorm thousands of ideas. And we will either do this manually, or sometimes we run it through machine learning techniques to see if there's any correlation between these ideas and retention. But it all starts with this. So we get all these ideas down on paper, and then we literally plot these charts one at a time. And some of this can take a lot of time, but it's well worth it. So on the left, what we've done is plot the first week's follows. So this is how often does somebody follow someone in the first week? So just after sign up, how many people did they follow? And we plot the density, so this is the percentage of them. In this case, you can actually see an interesting blip about 5, around the number 5, so here. This is because we have an on-ramp. So when you first join the service, we'll actually try and encourage you to get to 5 users. A bunch of people have bought before it, but we get a fair chunk of them to it. And in the left-hand case, you can see we're plotting those people who retained and not retained over the top of each other, so the red and the blue. And they're pretty much the same. So interestingly, this implies that following people on our service has no correlation with whether people retain or not in the future. It's pretty much useless. And every time we've done this, time and time and time again, follows does not lead to retention. We kept trying it. And we actually built our product on the basis that this was a good idea for around about 4 years. And I have no idea how we managed to get to 10 million users on the basis of a fact which was incorrect. Who knows? Anyway, so about a year ago, we changed tact. And we decided to plot out first week listens. So this is how often do you listen in week 1. And what you can see here is that the distributions are very different. So the red actually starts here, sorry, it's not very clear, and goes down here, whereas the blue goes very steep. And they don't perfectly over the line. So if we can adjust first week listens, we actually impact long-term retention. Or certainly that's the implication from this. So this implies that first week listens are key. That's what we need to aim for, not first week follows, which is what we've been doing for years. God damn it. So we start plotting these charts out, and I show you these two just to give you an idea of what's a good chart to see and what's a bad chart to see. But it will take a lot of time. These take weeks for us to correlate and sort of find all of them. There's hundreds of them. But at the end of the day, we're just looking for ones like this right-hand side. So then we take that data and we plot it, and we literally say, okay, so if you're going to listen to more content, what's the likelihood of you retaining? So for every listen we get you to do in the first week, we actually increase your retention probability by about 10%. This is pretty much golden territory. If we can keep pumping up listens, we can make you more likely to retain, which makes that growth curve kick off. I'll show you Twitter's data now, because Twitter actually published this in a talk a while back. It's pretty hard to get hold of usually. Most companies bury this stuff very, very deep. But this is Twitter's live data, or actual data from about a year ago. So what they've done here is on the x-axis, this is the number of times somebody used the service within the last 60 days. So they're looking at a 2-month window. It might even be 56. I'm not sure, because this is taken from one of their slide decks, and I don't know what it goes to. And then on the y-axis for them, this is number of total friends. Friends in their terminology is how many people you are following. And what they find is that if you follow more than 30 people, your likelihood to retain changes direction. So it goes steep up here, and then it plateaus. So what they will do now, based on this data, is design their entire product to get you to 30 people, following 30 people. Because after that, your likelihood just goes sky high, because the king in the graph. So their entire on-ramp is now designed to get you to follow 30 people as fast as possible. And if you start with a new Twitter account, you'll see them doing this. As soon as you hit 30, the entire site will change. It will go from trying to make you follow to trying to make you tweet and try to make you follow back. So this is the second graph on the right-hand side. So retention is essentially on the bottom again. So the number of days you logged in out of the last 56 or 60. And then the y-axis is your ratio of how many people you follow to those who follow you back. And the reason this is important is you engage on Twitter if you have conversation. If you're just listening or just shouting, That's not a very engaging product. But if you get that number to about a third, where a third of the people you follow are following you back, your likelihood of retention essentially plateaus. There's no more benefit to it, as in, up until about a third, you can see it's increasing very, very nicely. So one tactic they will do is every time they follow you, they will recommend to that person that they follow you back, because they know that you as a new user are significantly more likely to retain the more of those they manage to achieve. But as soon as they get to a third, that magical number, which is right over the right where the graph kinks up, there's no point in doing that tactic anymore. You may as well use that energy to do something else or direct them to other users. So they'll be directing them to users below a third up until that point. As soon as your ratio is above a third, you won't be getting those recommendations. They'll be going towards some other user. Data like this is key, and if you can find these moments within your product, and it takes a few users to be able to do this, like 10,000 users is kind of the minimum. Without that, you're not really going to get meaningful data. You can change your growth curve significantly. This is another Twitter graph. Number of times you use it within the first month. If they can get you to use it 8 times within the first month, they have a 90% retention rate. 90% of their users are still using their product 2 to 3 months later. So graphs like this, I'd highly recommend you try plotting for your company. They'll be different in every use case. You'll have something slightly different, but usually along these terms, like retention on the x-axis, some density on the right. And you'll start finding these kinks, and these are key moments in your product and what you should be aiming for. One thing to remember, though, is correlation is not necessarily causation. This is a fantastic graph of number of pirates against climate change. They align perfectly. This does not mean pirates cause climate change. It implies it. It might be because it's getting hot that people are more likely to steal. That's the only theory we've got for this so far, but you've got to remember this when you look at data, because if you look at enough data, you'll start seeing links, and those links don't exist. They're just by chance. So our key question is this cause or effect? Is this correlation or causation? There are techniques to break this down, and I'll talk you through those now, but they are hard, and they take a while to get used to. So one way of doing this is you build a bunch of features which power listens. So you try and increase the number of listens radically. And then you see your retention go up, and then you question it. Then what you do is you take those features and you remove them for 50% of users. And you see whether the retention for that 50% of users drops off or not. If at that point it does, you know that it is true, and this first week listens do cause it, and it's not a correlation by accident. So the other concern with this is that, well, the other thing that this helps to address, is that those people who first signed up to the service and are likely to retain are more likely to listen in the first week. So you can kind of apply these restrictions on here. What we did to prove this one, by the way, is when you first listen, when you hit the end of a piece of content, we recommend you something else to listen to, and it will autoplay. So for a bunch of users, we removed that autoplay, basically killing off their listening cycle and made them think about it. By killing off that listening cycle, we shift your listens down, and we actually saw retention drop off really nicely, exactly where we would have expected it. So how do you choose what to build? You kind of know that, at this point, we know anyway, that listens is huge for us. Listens in week 1 specifically. And if we look at day 1, it's even bigger than week 1 as a correlation. So how do you choose? Again, we start listing hundreds of kind of what facts do we know about users? Like, do we know whether they use web, desktop, iOS, Android? Do they have email notifications? What features didn't they interact with? We start making lists of hundreds of questions. And then we basically tell our engineers to go and plot them. And our biz dev guys as well. They actually have access to all of this data. So we start making these plots. We start plotting stuff out, like how many listens do we have on the first day on average? How many follows do we have on the first day on average? And these are very similar to the curves you saw previously. But then we take this data and we look at it in a different way. And we basically say, what opportunities are there here? So we can see here, the chart on the right, that 70% of people don't listen on day 1, or just over, actually. That's ridiculous. They've signed up, and they haven't listened to a piece of content on a music service. That is a failure for us. But if you look on the left-hand side, that's the number of follows on day 1. So the 0, which is the far left-hand bar, would show that 24% of people don't have followers, which would imply that about 77% of people have followed someone. So we've got all these people who are following people, but not listening to music. Yet we've just proven that listening is key, and following made no impact. This is what happens when you focus for 4 years on the wrong thing. So we take all the data, we plot it all out, and there are in the order of maybe 50 to 100 of these charts, most of which are no use, but by the fact of plotting them, you learn an awful lot about what's going on. And then we get the team to come up with ideas, and this is where things, quite frankly, get stupid. We use Asana. We love it. We use it to plot ideas and kind of manage that whole concept. We kind of plot everything, every concept, and then we pull together all the notes, all the screenshots of competitors doing it, all the cool ideas from non-competitors also doing stuff, build it up in big lists. And then about once every 2 weeks, we'll go through these lists. And we'll filter them, and we'll ask 4 questions of each one, and that very much dictates whether we will build something or not. And those 4 questions are key. So I highly recommend checking out Asana if you don't use it yet, or you want something to keep track of to-do systems. Those 4 questions are this: do we have the resources to build it? We're a small, very small bootstrap team. Often we just have to not do things because we don't have the resources to manage it, and that's a black and white decision: yes, no, go. Then the other 3, in combination, pretty much answer everything. How many users will this feature be relevant to? How frequently will they interact with it, and how impactful is that conversion? So particularly when we're looking at getting new users or making users retain more, we'll answer those 3 questions. So something like Up Next, which is a feature which, right at the end of playback, we want to know whether we're going to put in a new piece of content automatically for you or not, and basically autoplay it. We'll look at how many users is this relevant to. How many people actually get to the end of a piece of content? Because if it's not like above 1%, above a few percent, there's no point in building it. How frequently do they get to the end? Do they always get to the end, or is it a one-off thing? Then actually, when you build that feature, how many of them interact with it? So when we get to the end of a piece of content, how many of them hear it and then cancel it anyway? When you think about emails and impacts of things like that as well, ask these 3 questions. So for an on-ramp, everybody here, how many people here actually send welcome emails when people sign up to products, and those who don't? So it's a great example of this. So it impacts every user, or you can send it to every user. You can do it once only. You can't keep sending them the same welcome email. And actually the conversion rate, every time we've done it, is meaningless. We test these things quite often. We've sent them all welcome emails. We sent 50% of them welcome emails, 50% of not welcome emails. It made no difference to us. So for us, the conversion rate when we tried that was pretty much negligible, even though it would impact every single user. Then we did other features like, and I'll come onto this in a bit, after you finish uploading, we will show you a screen and recommend you what to do. Doesn't impact that many users because it only impacts the uploaders, not the listeners. However, they will see it every single time they do an upload. So pretty good interaction frequency. But the conversion rate for that page is insane. We get like 90% of them to interact with it. So even though it impacts just a small number of users, it does it frequently and with very high conversion rate. That means it's a fantastic thing to build. So we tend to go through these 4 questions, and we either find data to back them up or come up with estimations based on our experience on the site or experience of other people's data and what we see around us. A/B testing. Once we've built it, we have to test it, and this is something we do a lot of. I gave pretty much an entire talk on this a couple of weeks ago. There's good ways to do A/B testing and there's bad ways, and most people I see, like 90% of the people I see, do it really, really badly. And they just don't know what they're doing. So I'm hopefully going to show you very quickly some of the pitfalls and some of the ways to get around it. One of the dumbest A/B tests we ever did was take that Rethink Radio, listen to the best DJs and radio presenters in the world, and translate it into different languages to see if we could get it to engage better in countries where they didn't quite understand what the product was. So these are our actual live results for France. We put 20,000 users in each bucket. That's what is shown here. So the control group is in English, and there's 18,000 in that. The French translation, 18,000 again. Did it change plays, sign up, or listens? No. About the same number played, signed up, and listened. It made jack shit difference. My advice would be, don't do small changes. Like, every time we do these things, they never work. Link colors and button colors are the worst 2 things you could possibly do. To see those kind of levels of changes, which these these kind of small changes, you'll require vast quantities of users. We're talking 100,000, 1 million users to see a difference. You're not going to be able to do it early on. However, if you're willing to do big changes, you can see it with quite a small number of users. So this is the upload page I was talking about a while back, and this is, you finished uploading to the site, you're a DJ, imagine. You upload, and then this is the first page you see, and we want to do one thing. We want you to share it at this point. So the left-hand side involves a checkbox list, just to go down, well done, share it, promote it, embed it. And we'd hoped users would just check it off, and then, oh, buy Pro at the bottom, in case you want to subscribe. And then we tried the right-hand design as well. Previously, we had no design, so we have the control, which is a no page, the left-hand page, and the right-hand page. And surprisingly, I'll show you the data for this as well. We actually saw nearly a 200% over here increase in sharing to Twitter, 70% increase on email, 100+% on Facebook, based on the right-hand design. So that's this colorful one. The one on the left-hand side is pretty solid, 60%, 20, 87. Again, for those of you who have got these, this is basically the control. So this is no page. The data here is the basic checklist. This is the more fleshed out checklist. And each one of these rows is what we're testing against. So that's the outcome we're trying. If you guys are interested in checking this out, particularly if you're a Python shop, we wrote this, we open sourced this entire framework a couple of years back. It's available to use. It's called Django Experiments. But my point here is, don't make small changes, make huge changes. The biggest change we ever did was this. So about a year ago, the site looked like it did on the left. We did a complete relaunch, and we did this as an A/B test. And when we did it, the premise was, if this does not work, we are deleting this release. And this release, the one on the right, was 4 months worth of work by about 10 guys. And we were prepared, if these numbers didn't come up positive, to delete the whole thing. You need to set your team up with that expectation. And once you do, they're not afraid to try things. They're not afraid of failure anymore. They're willing to accept it. So my point is, if you're going to do these tests or think about this stuff, go really big, really, really big. I don't have all the data for this, but I can tell you we're up over 400% on pretty much every metric from this change. And our growth curve has gone from this to this. So my point is, go big, go really big, and change it violently, and be willing to change it back if it doesn't work. But at least don't be afraid to try. A couple of quick things, because I know my time's about to run out. If you're doing A/B testing, try AA tests. This is the idea that both versions are the same. And if you suddenly see that there's results or meaningful results and you know that both designs are the same, you've screwed up. It's that simple. We see this a lot when I talk to startups where they're doing A/B tests and they've just not measured it properly. So measure nothing, and your results should be nothing. I highly recommend you do that. A/B tests should be fast to implement. They should have no impact on your product performance, as in slowing it down. And make the results available to the entire team. We actually use Evernote for this, so big up to those guys, where all the team can log in, they can see all the results, they can search them. A couple of quick tools to try if you want to get into A/B testing as well. Optimizely is paid for, the others are free. So finally, don't be afraid of failure, accept it and learn from it. This photo was taken around about an hour after we did that launch of the product, and we were actually on holiday as a team together, and we were just like, we're done, we're out of here, let's hope for the best. We'll see it in a month's time, where the data is. So I kind of use this photo to remind me that it was worth taking that leap. And finally, this is kind of what we live by as a team. A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. That's how we think about things, how we try to move fast, and hopefully get it right, but don't be afraid of failing. Thanks for listening. Have you got any questions?
Thank you. 2 quick questions.
2 quick ones, sorry, overshot.
Yeah.
There's one there.
Hi, I'm Dragos. Thanks for the presentation, it was great. I have one quick question. On one of the latest slides, you were mentioning something about AA tests.
Yep.
Could you explain maybe from a, I don't know, not a very deep statistical point of view, but higher level what it means?
Okay, cool, yeah. So in an A/B test, you have version A and version B, and you basically say, what's the difference between the two? In an AA test, you have version A and version A, and you basically run the tests and see, is there any difference? There should be no difference, but if you see a difference, you are screwing up your A/B testing. And the number of times we see people do this is obscene, where they're looking for meaning in data which just doesn't exist. And running an AA test is a very, very good way of quickly checking your sanity and saying, is there any difference? Does that help clarify that?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to understand it. Does it mean that maybe the users that you are bringing in are not normal distributed, or the sample of users is not? This is what I'm trying to understand. The hypothesis is invalid, the null hypothesis doesn't work. I don't know, to
give you an example of the last one we found, so we run an AA test on the homepage pretty much permanently, And there is no change. They're both versions are the same. But what we found is that we're randomly distributing users, and we then ended up putting a lot of bots in one bucket by mistake and no bots in another. So things like Googlebot, actually in our case we have a bunch of spammers who continually try and attack us, and we put them all in one bucket. And what they do is they create a lot of comments. So our tests were saying commenting is massively up. And actually, there's no change. It's massively up because all the spam bots are in version A. So it gave us the peace of mind to look at the data and say, we're not expecting any results here. We have results. What's going on? And then we go back and evaluate how we design those tests. And in this case, it happened to be bots. But it's a good way of finding if there's any kind of anomalies in there or you've just messed it up slightly. It's very, very easy to mess this stuff up and not realize it.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Okay. Okay, one more question, the last one.
Hi, I've been using Mixcloud, I think, since you guys came out, and
cool.
It was a second option until this period that you mentioned that you made the violent changes, and I was like, it came out of the blue. I wanted to ask, what was the context for it? Because I know that there were years and nothing changed, and it was okay, but not a cool product, so to say. But now you can really feel a difference in like the whole experience. So I'm interested in what happened internally, because the change is pretty big.
Nothing really internally. So everyone asks, does somebody else take over product? Like, this is the same team as built the old product. So no, nothing there. We kind of got to this point where we've been A/B testing stuff a lot. And what you do is when you do a lot of testing, you do a lot of medium level changes and some smaller ones. And you get to this point where your whole design is kind of fragile and you've moved things around too many times and it just doesn't feel coherent. And we kind of felt that we'd got all this debt, and it's design debt literally, and we wanted to clear it out. And then we kind of looked around the team as well, and we kind of like, the team just seemed a bit down about stuff, and we're like, guys, okay, let's go big, like we're doing it. And two of the other major things we actually wanted to tick off from our list was persistent player on the bottom of the site. So previously, every time you clicked, we reloaded the entire page, and we popped this weird player in the background. So we wanted to go 100% Ajax, and by the time you've done that change, you may as well rewrite everything else. Rewriting your entire site is something everybody you meet in your entire career who you respect tells you not to do. But we just decided that that was it. We had to do it. And we gave people like 3 to 4 months, and we said, this is the launch date. We booked to go away on holiday as a team, and just like, we are hitting that deadline. No excuses. So that's what we did. Like, it was just a general feeling in the team. It just came to this point where we need to do this. Yeah, there was no major shift internally beyond that. No worries.
All right, we still have time for 2 more questions. All right, in the back, please.
Over there. Yep.
Great presentation. My question would be regarding the plots that you presented before. When you're looking at the data, how do you figure out the cause and effect?
Timing, basically. So I tried to go through it a bit, but I realized I rushed it. So following, imagine that's the feature, because I know that this is far easier to understand. Assume that following makes a difference to retention. So say we've proven that. What we would do is build a bunch of features to try and increase following. So things like people you should know, like little boxes on the right-hand side with follow buttons on it. We send you emails when somebody's following you saying follow back. So we build all this tooling to increase following across the site, and then we pull it. And that will allow us to work out whether those 2 different groups are retaining better based on following, basically accelerants towards following, so product features which accelerate following or not. And if we find those ones with those features retain better, then we know that following is the cause. It causes retention, not retention causes following. Does that help? Yeah, it's catch-22 here. If you guys have any questions about this stuff, come grab me afterwards. I will be around and happy to answer any questions.
Or you can take one more question.
Cool.
Yeah.
There was one more over there.
Hi, I'm Mihaela. I'm really interested to know what tool did you use to plot the charts, especially the retention charts, and what web analytics tool are you currently using?
So web analytics, we use Google Analytics as our baseline. It's a pretty good, just install it and it works. The event stuff in there is pretty neat if you want to look at stuff. With regards to those charts, we actually pull everything from logs. We're big fans of just log everything to hard drives, like log data, just keep a record of it all. And then we use things like Python, R, MATLAB to plot it. Those plots were actually MATLAB because we have a guy on my team who's very good at MATLAB, and he was just like, I can do that in 30 seconds. So my advice would be log it all to files. Like, don't worry about using Mixpanel. Don't worry about Kissmetrics. Just get it on the hard drives and store it, and then you can analyze that data later. One of the best pieces of advice I got in 2009 was by somebody who's become a dear friend of mine, was log every single metric you see. Just log it. Don't worry about it. Just log it, and eventually you will hire somebody with the skills to understand it. So we started that in 2009, and we're now getting guys who are very good at understanding this on board. And they actually have the entire history of the company recorded, every page for you. So they can now get those logs. We actually store them in S3 and Glacier, two very cool pieces of technology by Amazon, and it's essentially free. But they're now downloading the entire history of the page views of the site, and they can replay everything, literally everything, and work out any questions we want from that historical data. So I wouldn't worry too much about tooling. Just record it all on hard drives, on files, and put it in the cloud, and then bring it back later when you've got the experience to deal with it. That's how we do it. We use Hive and Hadoop, which are two big data technologies as well, but my advice is just record it and figure it out later, whatever your engineers are happy with. So yeah, we don't use anything too shiny.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Cool.
Let's give it up.